Turn your living room into a joyful, hands-free playroom with Cocomelon Sing and Play with JJ. Your child sings, moves, and learns right alongside JJ and friends, all on the big screen. It's designed thoughtfully to spark speech, rhythm, and coordination through songs and active play. Try an ad-free, safe, and interactive way to make screen time part of their learning and growth. Parents love how easy it is, voice-controlled and frustration-free. Kids love every moment of singing, laughing, and playing along. It's fun for them, and it's feel-good for you. Available now in the Volley app on your smart TV. Just search Volley in your TV's app store and start your free trial of Cocomelon Sing and Play with JJ today. That's Cocomelon Sing and Play with JJ, available now in the Volley app on your smart TV. Search Volley and start your free trial today.
Volley. Welcome to Homeschooling Outside the Box, the podcast that encourages and equips moms to homeschool an outside-the-box child.
Hi there, this is Cindy Renna, and thank you so much for listening. Today, I have the honor and pleasure of having a repeat guest on the show. Sonya Shafer is joining us from Simply Charlotte Mason, and Sonya has been on I believe it was in season 2. So I will link to that in the show notes, and you can hear everything she had to say about her wonderful curriculum, Our Preschool Life. But I wanted to share with you lovely listeners about exams today. And when I was thinking, who can I talk to about exams that are taught in the Charlotte Mason style, I could think of nobody better than the wonderful Sonya. So Sonya, say hello, please.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for having me back, Cindy. It's great to talk with you.
I'm so excited. Okay, so if you are a Charlotte Mason homeschooler, or if you are vaguely familiar with her philosophy, you might think that there is some sort of contradiction when I say I want to talk about exams taught in the Charlotte Mason style. There has somehow developed this myth out in cyberspace that Charlotte Mason doesn't do tests, and she doesn't do exams. But if you read her volumes, you see very clearly she did do exams. Now, they're not what we typically think of, because very typical of Charlotte Mason, she's always doing things in a different way, in a better way. So that is the case with exams too. So Sonya, let's start by talking, let's be mythbusters. Let's talk about why do people think that it's un-Charlotte Mason-y to do exams? Do you think?
I think it's because of our background with exams from our own educations. The exams that we grew up with in a typical school tradition were all content-based questions to find out what you don't know is how it felt, What are the facts? And so in our heads, that's what an exam is. And when you start in with Charlotte Mason and find out you don't ask direct questions on the content, you let the child narrate, then you kind of think, oh, so we must not do any exams because she's not focusing on the facts. I wonder if that's what kind of makes that disconnect in our brains. But as you said, she did do exams every 12 weeks.
Yes. And so you're right, because if I think back to high school exams, it was this total shift. It was very different than what had been happening previously. We went to a different mode, and I went to a Catholic private school. So we had, a dress code and everything. And during exams, we got to wear jeans, and we got to come in late, and we got to have food in the classroom. It was like this completely different environment because this big thing was happening. And so Charlotte Mason, it doesn't feel at all like that. It's just a very natural, organic next step to what you were learning the last 12 weeks. So let's talk about her purpose versus, like you said, what we're all used to, the multiple choice kind of questions, the gotcha questions, what year did this happen in? Those type of questions are really positioned to see what you don't know. And so Charlotte Mason had a very different idea about what exam questions should look like. Hers were more about what they did know, right?
Yes, that's right. It was almost a celebration of what they had personally learned and how they had grown over those 12 weeks. In a way, you could call it that. It was much more of a positive attitude and environment than when we think of exams. We think high pressure, cramming, and it's do or die time, and we get stressed out about this. But hers were very much more about, let's spotlight how you have grown. Let's celebrate what you have learned. And here's your chance to shine, basically, is what the exam. Now, there was still an aspect of accountability there,
sure,
which is important, because we all have the human nature of wanting to slough off if we can. So knowing that the exam week is coming still has that accountability for that student. They weren't, a walk in the park, but it was much more of a positive, affirmative atmosphere than what we have probably grown up with.
Right, definitely. And the other thing that's missing from her exams is you talked about the high pressure, the competition. It was, how did you score and what did you make? And, finding out where you ranked in your class, where these are much more, like you said a couple of times, about how the child has grown. It doesn't really matter where he compares with his, in a homeschool environment. Of course, it's your siblings, you would be competing against. It doesn't matter that you're, doing better than so-and-so. It just matters if the child has grown. Right.
It's not really, the questions weren't really set up for who's going to be better at this. Many of the questions were set up as, you choose what you want to tell me about within these parameters. Like, okay, for example, the younger children, if we read a bunch of stories about heroes during this term, you tell me what's a hero and choose a story about a hero to tell back to me. So there was a personal element in there. The child is a person. We respect each one as an individual. Let that child have a say in what they want to share with you. And that also gives us a peek into what's happening in their hearts and minds. What idea really resonated with them and has planted a seed within their hearts.
Yeah. Which is it's such a pleasure to get that sneak peek into them and see what is growing instead of, were you paying attention to anything? It's not that. It's like you said, the positive side of that question. So how did Charlotte do exams? What did that look like in her schools? Because if you're listening and you don't know a lot about Charlotte Mason, she was a real teacher. She was not a homeschool mom. So she taught, not that we're not real teachers, we are, but she taught in a school environment. So how did exams look in a school environment for her?
Well, she taught in she taught in a school environment. And then later when she was over the teacher training college, she was doing a couple of things. She was writing programs for classrooms, but she was also writing programs for homeschool moms to use. So the way she did it can work in either setting, which is kind of cool. Yeah. So what she did is at the end, her school year was divided into 3 12-week terms. And at the end of each term, that 12th week was exam week. So it was spaced evenly throughout the year. Now, that wasn't the only time that you had an assessment of the children. If you are following her recommendations, her methods of doing narration all the way through those terms, you are tracking that student's progress and their attention, their retention as well. So when you get to exam week, you shouldn't have any surprises. You should be able to help spotlight where the children have learned and celebrate with them how they have grown.
So what would be a typical question let's talk about adapting it to our homeschool. So if we're going to have these questions, what types of questions was she asking?
Well, let's break it into two sections here. For more than half of your subjects, you don't have to ask questions. So that kind of takes the pressure off of us. Really, there's only about 5 subjects that you have to come up with questions on. Let's look at the easy ones first, all right? So like for music study, all you have to do is say, for the younger ones, ask them to describe their favorite piece of music that you listened to this term. And you can level it up and down. So for your older ones, you might say, write 5 lines about 5 different pieces we listened to this term. So you can see how it's much more difficult, but you're still giving them that freedom to choose for themselves. Which 5 pieces do I want to write about?
Right.
So it going up and down. So that's easy to do. Picture study. You can choose one of the pictures and say, I want you to describe this one to me without looking. Or for the older ones, you could ask them to describe 2 or 3 of them. For handcrafts, she had an outside person come in and examine the work that they had done. Like if they had knit something or if they had made something out of wood, give it to somebody outside the home to evaluate. Many things like that. Reading, it was just, I'm going to choose a selection for you to read aloud to me. Depending, little kids, it might be very short, very easy. High schoolers, it might be an article in the newspaper. So you can level up and down all of these. But for many subjects, recitations, your scripture memory, your poetry, the little ones, all you have to do is choose which piece you want them to recite. For the older ones, which pieces you want them to recite. So for many of these subjects, all you're doing is choosing. You don't have to write questions. That kind of takes some of the pressure off. We can all breathe, you know?
Yeah.
And then, and for foreign language, it was just, here's a picture. Tell me what you can about this picture in the language you're learning.
Yeah.
That's so open-ended.
It is. And it's also so much more challenging than a multiple choice question that says, choose the correct answer. What is happening in this picture? And then there's like 3 or 4 options in French, and the kid just picks. You know, it's way more difficult to have to dig in and translate and then get those words on paper. So it's that beautiful both. It's so much more open-ended and child-friendly because it's what they want and what they know, but it really is challenging. You know, I don't want people to discount that or think that it's not as challenging because the child gets to choose it. You know, it's
right.
Requiring so much more of them.
Yes.
So I love that. I love that. So those are great questions.
Yeah, the only subjects then that you have to actually create content questions, if you will, was 5 different subjects: history, geography, Bible, science, and math.
Yeah.
So those are the only ones that you're going to want to create questions about. But again, try and offload the baggage from what we are used to as exam questions. These are much more just like narration prompts. Tell the story of, and for the little kids, you might say, tell me your favorite story about a hero, as we mentioned before. Or in Bible, it might be, tell me one story from the life of Joseph, or something like that, depending on what you studied. Then for the older ones, you can level it way up as far as you want to. There's a whole scale of these questions. And I wrote a blog post about these, and I did a video on my podcast that has a bunch of these types of questions that we can link to in the show notes as well. The older kids, you can give a quote from one of the stories in the books or one of the chapters in the books they have read and say, who said this quote, and explain the situation in which it was given. For the high school kids, you can say, all right, you read this story and you read this chapter, compare and contrast the characters between the two. And so you can ask for this whole essay for them to write. And that might be something else we need to mention, Cindy.
Yes.
When the children were younger, first through
Yes.
second grade, they were not writing these answers. They were giving them orally, just as they did for narration. But then as I got older, they would do more writing, still keep some oral components, but they would do more writing. And in those younger grades as well, they would do it orally, but they would dictate those answers to an adult who would then write them down. So there was a permanent record of that exam.
That's good, because I was going to ask about that, about record keeping, if we can rabbit trail for just a second. So when, and we're thinking we need to have, and that is a very much a part of our education, probably is having to have a record of something, something to show for our work. So you are having the younger children dictate, and you are writing them down, and then you could even video, right? I mean, exactly. So what are some options for keeping this information?
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. Charlotte didn't say anything about audio recording or video recording,
sure.
Of course.
Right.
But I think those are viable options for us today. If you want your child to do an oral narration for an exam week, just turn your phone around and capture it on video, and you've got it. If anyone, and in a way, that could even be a stronger record than a written component.
Sure.
Because you can cheat on a written one. You can clean up the grammar. You can change the punctuation. Yeah. But and in fact, I've read how some college professors are shifting back to doing oral exams.
Look at that.
So many students are hiring other people to write their papers for them. And you can cheat on papers, but you cannot cheat on an oral exam. So if you get that on audio or on video, I think you'll have a wonderful record.
I do too. And I think, because we've done a lot of video in the past for exams, and we sort of break our day up, and I'm going to talk to you about how our week looks in a second. But we sort of do the writing part on one day, and then we do the next day is more of a performance, like anything that you need to orally dictate. So if they're playing a piece on the piano or doing their memory verses or anything, I think children sort of rise to the occasion. And when that video comes out and they know that they're going to get to rewatch it, or that with the piano, sometimes there's 4 children and me, so a few of us will sit and listen. So it's almost like you can see them straighten up a little bit, like, okay, and now that it's going to be recorded, I need to really focus a little. Something seems to switch in their brains. Do you find that? Yes,
it can. Some children that just, makes them rise to the occasion. Some children, it puts a little too much pressure on and they don't like that. So you got to judge according to the child. Let me also mention, I love your idea of on piano having a little family recital, as it were.
Right.
And it's wonderful for the performer to have that practice. But you are also doing a wonderful thing for the other kids. You are teaching them how to sit at a recital, how to sit politely, how to show their attention, how to show their appreciation. So you are teaching them both sides of that, and both are important. So good for you.
Oh, thank you. I never thought about the other side of it. So that's a good little practice then. Going back to writing the exam questions, how do you handle when you have, let's say, math? Math, the math we use Math UC, and we love it, but it's got the exams written into it. It's got a unit test and an end of chapter test. And so how do you work that in? If they've just done a unit test, are you going to ask them more questions, or do you just sort of say math is its own thing?
It depends on the curriculum. You can say the same thing for the upper level sciences, like if they're using Apologia Sciences. Right. On those situations, I would say don't let the curriculum handcuff you. Don't say, well, we just, like you said, we just did the unit test last week, but since it is the 12th week of the term now, we've got to come up with another test. Don't worry about that. Those have tests built in as you go along. So I wouldn't worry about it at that point. I would say just follow what your curriculum is showing you. Whatever works best for you would be good. Now, if you want to have, like, if that 12th week is going to be a whole family celebration and all the other kids are going to be demonstrating what they have learned in math, and the one child, doesn't get to, if that child is feeling poorly because they're left out, well, fine, pull a couple of problems on the board from their exam, or make up a couple similar word problems like the exam and say, here you go. Go ahead and do this again, just to show everybody what you have learned. That's fine.
Right. That's wonderful. And I love that so much of what she does, it just so easily adapts to our homeschools. It's a nice transition. Okay. So the question, of course, that I always ask is, how can we take this idea and customize it if we've got children who are more outside the box, if we've got a child with autism or dyslexia or ADHD? And I feel like this is going to be such an easy answer because I think Charlotte Mason just set this up for us where it is so adaptable. We're not having to, it's not like going to take the ACT. Like, they don't have to sit in a room with other people and write on this paper. But what are some ideas? Because you talked about doing some orally and then doing some written. What are some ways that we can adapt exams to fit our outside the box kids?
Well, let me also throw in another advantage. You mentioned you don't have to go sit in a room with a bunch of other people, and you don't have to write on paper. You also are not spending a whole week reviewing and cramming before the test time. That's another big difference. And those types of situations, can really throw some of our kids off when you get out of the routine.
Yes.
That's especially with my autistic daughter. The routine is the comfort level. That is the security blanket, if you will. So what worked well, the way Charlotte did exam week, is during the regular time when you would do history anyway, do your history exam on exam week. And during the regular time, so you're keeping your regular routine going. You're just doing the exam questions instead of some new material. That routine and that security is still there for those who need it. Other students are going to love having, you don't even have to call it an exam week. If that makes your child stressed, then call it a celebration week or call it a favorites week. I'm going to ask you to tell me, what was your favorite story from the ones we read in this book this term? Which of these is your favorite? And then I'm going to tell you my favorite. Or with pictures, lay out the 6 or 8 pictures you looked at this term and then say, okay, you describe, I'm going to describe, I'll go first to set the little model so you have an idea what I'm expecting. I'm going to describe my favorite picture of these and see if you can find it. And so you can describe it and then turn it around and say, okay, now you pick a favorite picture and describe it and see if I can find it based on your descriptions. So just things like that, you can tweak it because it is so personal. You can tweak it in order to highlight what that child has learned and how they've grown. One challenge.
And let me jump in real quick. I just want to clarify that Sonya is referencing her gorgeous picture study portfolio cards, artist cards. So she's referencing the art cards. And those are available. I'll leave a link because when you do a picture study, you look at these different art prints. And so she's got a gorgeous product that I can link to. That's going to be in the show notes. So sorry to cut you off. I wanted to make sure we didn't miss that.
Great. That's great. Thank you. One challenge that some of us come up against with some of our special needs children, you get to the end of 12 weeks and you think, did she learn anything? Has she progressed in any skills? Some of our kids need to percolate longer than 12 weeks for you to see any progress. And so but there has to be growth in some area. And maybe it's not even an academic area. Maybe it's that, you know what, over these last 12 weeks, my daughter learned how to wipe her mouth with a napkin.
Yeah.
You celebrate that. So don't get head down focused on the exams are only for academic subjects, especially with our kids who need to grow in many areas of life. Let's celebrate growth wherever we have seen it.
Oh, I love that. Just celebrate growth. That might be the title for this. I just love that. That's the focus, because I feel like there's this voice probably coming from my rigorous education as a child saying, you know, it's good stress and teach them to do well under pressure, and, you know, wanting that anxiety piece, like this is going to be a big week, that, you know, the whole idea of exams being about how they're doing under pressure. But that's really not what needs to be measured, because most of us just crumble under pressure, especially in the beginning years when you're not seasoned to it necessarily. And so to look at it from a different perspective and say that, no, we're celebrating how they've grown, that is key. And I've got an example too, because when we started exams, you know, we started the written ones, and my Benjamin, who's on the spectrum, could not, I mean, his answers would be like, it was good, you know, I mean, or like, I hated that part. But now on the topics he did enjoy, on literature or artist study or composer study, or, you know, the things he liked, he could write quite a bit about. So for him, his growth was more about, Benjamin, I bet you can say 2 sentences about science also, you know, and then as we've done exams, just him being able to stretch himself beyond volcanoes explode, you know, and be able to say, and create lava, you know, and just to add to his thought, just that stretch, right? For him, that would be considered appropriate growth, and that we are moving forward. What would you say, though, if you have a child who you know can produce something? Well, let me back up, because maybe I'm throwing judgments in there. What do you do with poor exam questions? What do you do when the exam comes back? Especially, I think, when you first get started and the children aren't really used to what's happening. How do you address that if you get an exam back and you think, I don't know that they learned anything this term? How would you approach that?
Before looking at the child and saying, what's wrong here, I would look at myself and I would look at the book that was used.
Sure.
And so judge and see, first look at the 12 weeks or the 11 weeks prior to this 12th week. Were you faithful in doing those pre-reading reviews every time? So before you start a new chapter, you're reviewing the last one. Last time we read about volcanoes erupting. What do you remember about that chapter? And just try and pull something out so that the child is used to these types of questions all the way along. So exam week should not hold any surprises for us. If we have been faithful to assess their retention and their interest and their attention throughout all those 11 weeks, when we get to the 12th week, it should just be pretty much the same thing. So I would look first at that prior 11 weeks. Was I faithful in this subject to do those types of things all the way along? And
because
then
they're linking a chain, right? I mean, they have to link it to something existing, or else it's just these floating pieces of information that don't.
And they can float out very easily if it's not anchored somewhere. Context, you know, the more I work with special needs kids, the more I become convinced that context is everything. Yeah. If they don't understand the context, they're lost, totally lost. And that little piece of whatever it is has nowhere to land that makes sense in their world. So making sure we've done that background work is the important thing. I would also look at the book that was used. If the question that we're talking about that they did poorly on was over a certain book that we have been reading this term, look at that book and look at its history and say, were we struggling with this all the way along? Right. Maybe we need to switch out this book. Maybe it's the book's fault, not the child's fault. And don't feel bad. Don't beat yourself up if you come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Charlotte did that her whole life.
List. Right.
Yeah. She would get those exams back from hundreds of kids who had used certain books she had recommended. And if they all were struggling with it, it's like, we got to find a new book. And sometimes you just don't know that until you get those exam questions back. So give yourself grace in that respect.
Yeah. And a lot of our kids, and especially with the autism, they've got such specific interests. I mean, such very, and that's what it always was with Ben. If it didn't register with him as something worth knowing, he's not going to know it. I mean, he's going to have so you do have to step back and say, okay, maybe, going back to the volcanoes, maybe studying volcanoes is not going to be his thing, but what in science that he might attach? What does he already have a natural motivation toward? What does he enjoy? And finding, almost playing matchmaker and seeing, for your family, how you can find a resource that they will enjoy or connect with versus, this book's on every book list and, I think everybody needs to read it and pushing through it just to get to the end and nobody really enjoyed it or gained anything. So I love that we have that freedom and that you said, Charlotte Mason did the same thing. She would just swap it out. So we're not married to or indebted to any particular resources to say we do Charlotte Mason. There's freedom.
Right. There are so many thousands of good living books out there. Find the ones that are going to work for your family. And yes, there is, Charlotte Mason's all about the child building a relation with different things. And so, yes, many of our kids already have a certain relation that they are focused on. And we can do a couple of things. We can stay in that vein of that relation and find a book that will speak to that existing relation. But we can also, if we can find a neighbor relation, if you will, one that's just right next to it, that will just kind of widen that relation a little bit and help them, because our kids don't know what they don't know.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right.
And so we aren't going to focus on only giving them more of what they already know. We also want to expand their horizons. But with some of our kids, we might need to do that in baby steps.
Right. And let's be Amazon to them. If you like this book, you might like this, and give a few other options. And right, to help them grow. But the key to that is starting where they're at. It's not, if I order a Shakespeare book on Amazon, they might say, oh, you might also like, if I get 12th Night, they might say, well, you might like Macbeth too. They're not going to say, I can't even think of something so opposite. You might like Dick and Jane. That's so totally opposite of what I had looked at. So let's not stand on the outside and say, what about Dick and Jane? Let's meet them where they're at and say, oh, you like this? Well, guess what? You might like this. We could try it. And I just love that.
To the whole idea of focusing on what they don't know versus focusing on what they do know and how they have grown. That's just where the focus is.
Yes, that is so, so good. Okay, so we're all in love with this idea of celebrating growth. We're all converts. We're all going to be loud and proud Charlotte Mason examiners. Tell us, Sonya, what do we do Monday? Okay, let's say we're at the end of our term. And actually for us, we're on week 11. Probably when this airs, it'll be week 11. So tell me the next week, week 12, it's Monday morning, or maybe it's Sunday night. What do I do Sunday night through And we always do end with an end of the year picnic or celebration of some sort. So take me through Sunday through, maybe Wednesday, Thursday, however long. Show me what that week's going to look like.
Well, before you get to the week, like you said, you need to do a little preparation for it, because we can't expect our students to give their best if we have not given our best as well. So we aren't just going to float through this and try and wing it. We do want to do some preparation. But as we talked about, most of the subjects, you're just going to be making selections. Which pictures do I want them to describe, or which portions do I want them to read aloud? Or so you're just going to be making selections. And I talk more about this on that podcast that we're going to link to. So that will give you more details. And then you're going to want to look at those 5 subjects that you do need to write questions about and get some questions in mind. Usually there were about 2, maybe 3 questions for each book that was read from during the term, depending on how much was read from that book. All right.
Okay. So pause there for a second. Let's say history, we read from a spine, but then we read maybe 1 or 2 other books to dig deeper into. Let's say we studied the American Revolution. That was like our theme. So we studied that time period sort of broadly, but then we really honed in on the American Revolution and read a couple books. So for history, how many questions would you do? What might they sound like?
Depending on the age of the child or the level of the child, you would want to do a couple of questions from each of the books that you read.
Okay.
So with the younger ones on that spine book, it might be of the stories that we read, you could choose one of the generals we read about, or one of the battles we read about, whatever it is with this American history. You said the Revolution or just American history? The Revolution. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So choose an aspect of it and give the child a choice. Tell a story about this that we read, this category. And then for the ones that you dug deeper into, let's say you read about George Washington. Let's say you read Tulliver's Secret, where the little girl has to get a message across the river to General Washington without being detected by the soldiers. It's a great story. All right, so you might say, tell about Tulliver. Which part of the story did you like best?
Okay.
Give them that option. You might, if you read about, let me think of one for upper level. Let's say maybe you were reading Benjamin Franklin, his autobiography.
Okay.
So you could, for an upper level, you could say, what were I think it were 11 or 12 perfections that he worked on. Mm-hmm. Of those, which one do you think is most important? Okay. And why? And then compare his worldview to your worldview.
Yeah.
So you can level it up or level it down, but you wanted a couple of questions from each book that was read, because usually you're doing history more than one day a week during the, right? And so you're going to spread out your exam questions the same number of days during those same time slots is how Charlotte did it. We are not handcuffed to that, but that's how she did it. So you would have questions on one book for Monday, and then Tuesday during your history slot, you're going to ask questions about another one of the books. So you can spread it out that way.
Love that. Okay. All right. So I cut you off. You were telling us what to do Sunday night. We sit down and prepare. Okay. Exactly.
You make your selections and you write your questions. And what can be helpful is to write those questions on little index cards. Mm-hmm. So then you can arrange them however you need to. And if you have older students who are going to be writing their answers, their exams, you can hand them the card during that time slot and say, okay, take this to that other room where it's quiet and write your answer to that one while I listen to your younger brother's oral narration on this over here. So
Good.
that's one way. Those index cards can be very helpful, and you can arrange them however you want to use them as well.
Yeah.
So once you have your questions, then come Monday, the easiest way is to just go through your usual routine. And if you have a 20-minute slot, first off for math with your second grader, then just do your math exam if that lines up, if you're doing a math exam that week. Or if you're doing, usually you do your family history first thing, then do your exam questions. And you might, during picture study, during art time, you might go ahead and do a family exam where you ask the younger one to describe his favorite picture out loud, and everybody gets to listen to it.
Okay.
So that kind of, elevates him. He's on the spot here.
Sure.
And then you might specifically ask one of your older children to describe a picture of your choosing, and you're going to choose a different picture than the younger one described. So there's no direct comparison and competition going on.
Right. And you're writing this down. I love that, because I was going to ask about family. What do you do about the family subjects? So are you writing down, the younger child speaks, and then you kind of jot or recording what they say, and then it kind of goes round robin. You do, each one gets a turn for those subjects.
Yeah.
Okay.
That
That's
would
great.
work well.
Good.
Or you can, like we said, you can stay with the younger ones and then give the older ones some additional work to do in writing in the other room later on, depending on which subject it is.
See, because I've made the mistake of doing, or like I said, there were times we did the whole exam all day, and that fatigue, you can just see them kind of, swirling downward by the end of the exam questions. So I love the idea of it just being what your day was anyway. You don't sort of do a special thing. During this time period, you do this. When you're going to be reading poetry anyway, that's when you do the poetry side of things.
The recitations.
So,
have them do their recitations. Now, I did like your idea of if it works best for you, set aside one day for all of our presentations and make it a special day. Grandma and Grandpa are going to come or are going to Skype in. And
that's
maybe
so
we're going to
fun.
do it around supper time, and Dad's going to come home early so he can be there for that day. You can make this whatever you want it to be, but just try to make it a positive experience. We're celebrating what they have learned. We're not nitpicking to find out if they meet the standard, if they have met the bar in comparison to everybody else, which is what we grew up with exams.
Exactly. If you live up to my expectations. So that's great. I do love that idea of maybe on Thursday, because, you could start combining things, and you might finish sooner than you would in a typical week with the exams. And so then by the time you get to Thursday or Friday, doing a sort of, a Rena variety show and having, this one's going to play the piano and this one's going to show her little crochet line. And, yes, I love that idea. And then, even making it open. I've never thought of that, doing Skyping in, because all of my people are in Michigan. So that would be just a really fun way to involve other family members and kind of say, look at how fun this is, in a way that the child enjoys. Because I know there's one that would not want to do that. So that's fine. We're not going to, I know Charlotte was against parlor tricks, so we're not supporting that. But I do love the idea of involving, especially the father. I had read something where Charlotte said that the piece of reading, have the child read it to the father. And, I know all families are different, but for us, my husband works a very typical, he leaves in the morning, and some nights he doesn't get home till 7, and so he doesn't ever see usually our homeschool day. So for him to be able to kind of choose which book, with my guidance, I would say, Owen can probably read from these books, and then letting him choose what selection. That was a really neat interaction for them and some accountability. There was almost, again, like with the performance, like it took it up a notch somehow because they're not used to doing those things with my husband. So that was a neat exchange, and they got to share that with him, and he loved being a part of that. So I love that idea. And then sort of celebrating with a picnic or, depending on where you're living, if you get to go to a restaurant or not.
Or have tea,
Or have tea, do something where you do go out and sort of celebrate all the growth that took place that term.
Now, your one child who does not do well with the presentation pressure, maybe have that child participate in a less stressful way. Like he's going to tell who's next.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So he still is getting used to public speaking in a very short, small way. But and you can even practice ahead of time, You can tell him what to say and have him practice just to say, Susie is going to talk about her picture. That's it.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Oh, that's so good.
But that might give him, so he can still participate, but not feel under stress.
Right. I love that. So you've given us so many good ideas. I think you've just changed, helped us make that paradigm shift that needs to occur when we are teaching in the Charlotte Mason method, where we can approach it as a way to celebrate growth instead of being under all this pressure to excel on an exam or to live up to some sort of standard. And that is very freeing. So I appreciate that. But I do want to ask you before you go to tell us about anything that you have coming up. I know the world is in upheaval and all conferences have been rescheduled or put online or things like that. But what have you got going on this summer that we can be a part of?
We have many of the conventions that we were scheduled to speak at have been rescheduled, as you said. Most of them are now going to be hopefully held in July and August. Okay. You can find that schedule on our website. We've been updating it as we get word of the changes that happen. But the one thing that I'm really excited about is our Charlotte Mason Together retreat that is held the end of July in Stone Mountain, Georgia, here about a half hour from my house, at a beautiful park, a lovely resort nestled inside this wooded park. And we just spend the whole weekend together as Charlotte Mason moms and dads and learn more and encourage each other and get ready and geared up for our best school year yet. So we are still planning on that happening the last weekend in July. And hopefully we would love to see whoever wants to come along to meet us there and enjoy a weekend together.
That's great. So is registration open or not yet?
It is. Registration is open, and we are extending the deadline right up until like the day before it happens, right before it starts. You can still cancel the day before and get a full refund just because everything is so up in the air right now. We wanted to make it very easy for you to go ahead and register, get your reservation in there to make sure that you've got a seat. But then you're not out anything if something happens and we do need to cancel it. So hopefully with that flexibility, we'll be able to have something to look forward to with flexibility as well.
Wonderful. That is so great. So that's a wonderful idea to go and do a retreat with just like-minded moms and dads and just, it sounds like a beautiful location. So that sounds great. I hope it can stay planned.
I hope so too.
And not get rescheduled. Yeah. Okay. And then otherwise, Charlotte, look, I'm calling you Charlotte. You're so
That's
Charlotte
listening. I'll take that as a compliment.
Sonya has got a wonderful podcast that I'm going to link to quite a few times with some of the things that we spoke about today. So that's probably the other best place to find you, right? And then everything can be linked to from simplycharlottemason.com.
Yes, that's right.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today and giving us a new perspective on exams.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thanks so much for listening to Homeschooling Outside the Box. If you are loving the show, please head over to iTunes and leave a review. This is a great way to help other moms just like you find encouragement in their homeschool with their outside-the-box child as well. For more encouragement, be sure to head to cindyrenna.com and you can check out some great blog posts as well as a shop that will help equip you on your homeschooling journey.